I don't even know what to believe anymore. I really
Okay, you guys ready? All right, hey guys, everybody. Thanks for coming. Real quick, I want to give a big thank you to Drain Doctor for sponsoring the pizza tonight. So, oh, next slide. Hold on, I'm being prompted. There we go. Okay, cool. I'm going to say a couple words.
It's a really odd sponsorship. I'll explain. I am the son-in-law of the people that own this company. They do drain cleaning and sewer and all that kind of stuff, and you have houses and businesses and all that. There's swag at the back, not like T-shirt, like there's DigitalOcean T-shirts, but there's business cards with 10% off on the back, pens and pads. So grab those and enjoy the pizza. And
yeah, thanks. So yeah, everybody give a big round of applause. Thank you. Also, at the end of the presentation tonight, we're going to be giving out a free ticket to NashJS. You guys haven't heard about this yet. It's awesome. It's a completely online user group. You do have to get tickets to it. It's really cheap, and they have like some of the best presenters every single month. So you guys check it out. NomadJavaScript.com. We'll give a ticket out. You guys be sure to tweet about them, share the word. Let's see what else is going on in the community. Tennessee is gearing up here soon. I think there's like 10, maybe 10 tickets left, if that. Oh, they're sold out. Never mind. Forget this. If you don't have Tennessee tickets, too bad. So yeah, that's all I got this week. Thanks for coming out. Quick show of hands. Who's the first time being here? Killer. Cool. Who's from Meetup? Same people? Okay, cool. Welcome. We do this every month. Second Wednesday of every month, 6 o'clock. We got some really cool stuff planned for this year. Some game dev stuff, some React stuff, obviously. Angular, Node, everything. So it's going to be awesome. Got a good year planned. If you're interested in speaking, tweet me at the word knowledge spelled backwards at Twitter, and I'll get you on the list. So anyways, without further ado, got Kevin Old, React.js. And, oh yeah, thanks to Emma for sponsoring the venue. I always forget to say thanks to those guys. If you want to go on the Wi-Fi, Emma Hart is the Wi-Fi user, or Wi-Fi SSID. Username is Emma. The password is 11Lee, L-E-A, capital L-E-A. And it'll like prompt you whenever you go to Google or whatever. Sorry, I'm not very prepared this evening. Sorry. Take it away. Yeah, it's knowledge. I have no idea.
I enjoy the pizza, so I got the sponsor. So there's that, and I'm going to give a talk about React and Flux. So a little about me. I'm a full-stack JavaScript developer these days. My background's been in Perl and JavaScript, and I've gravitated toward the front end and all the fun stuff that's there over the past 10 years. React is a different, I don't know, it's hit a big nerve with me. It solved a need that I've had for years over this past year. So I'm going to talk about my experience with using it. I'm using it for various prototypes and little apps here and there. But in the past, I've written things with spaghetti JavaScript, and of course, we have the term spaghetti JavaScript because of where we're at, right? You all have apps that you've inherited that are spaghetti. jQuery and Backbone and Knockout and Angular, those are in the common space. So I'm not knocking on any one of them. I'm just simply sharing my wins and my losses with using React. So how many have used React or played with it, tutorial? You know how to spell React? No. Okay. So, okay, good. Yeah. So, React is a JavaScript library for creating user interfaces, and I and others immediately dismissed the idea when it was announced at JSConf 2013. So Facebook came up on stage at the end of JSConf and said, here's what we've got. This will solve your UI issues and whatever. It wasn't well received. They updated it and delivered a better presentation in the fall of 2013, and then the community embraced it. So it's all around a single simple idea, reusable components. The main thing, all of this supports that single idea. To simplify code, build reusable components, virtual DOM. So who's heard of a virtual DOM? Okay. So a virtual DOM, and let me back up, with the history of working with a browser, you have a DOM. And that has been the major bottleneck with pushing and pulling and querying for all of our apps for years and years. This solves that. You have the ability to build isomorphic apps or server-side JavaScript. When I saw this come out, I kind of thought that we'd had server-side JavaScript for a long time, but it really got a bad rap. And so I think this was a way of re-energizing that and eliminating the DOM querying. Also, I believe his name is Christopher Chadu. He's on the React team, and he gave a presentation a month or two ago about how the React API is extremely small, and that's the point, so that you can keep it in your head. All of this is about keeping things in your head and building small components, and just think Legos, right? You've got something that does something really well. So we're going to talk about all of these things. I've got a lot of code samples. So this is the main statement that's on their site. To build large applications with data that changes, right? And we all have applications, and then we put them and get data moving back and forth, and then we're like, okay, I didn't think about the data that was going to change. These support two of their primary things to be simple. So you express how your app should look at any given point in time. Okay, it's a little bit to get your head around, but I've got some resources at the end that can help you get up to speed. The next is just being declarative. So when the data changes, React knows how to only update the changed parts. So I'll say that again. That's really cool, because right now we're doing a lot of querying, and we get like the highest level of something and rip that out and put it back in. But React in the virtual DOM goes all the way down to, if you make a text change, it goes all the way down to that element in the virtual DOM, updates the text, rewrites the page, and then you're golden, right? So what we'll cover, JSX, that's some controversy there, but so we'll talk about that. I'll walk through some components. Props, anyone heard of props? I mean, those of you who play with, you're familiar with props. Props in state, yeah. The component lifecycle, so everything in React's a component, so it's worth stepping through those, how it operates. Like when you put a component on the page, what happens? And the cool thing is it's not that scary. So we're going to look at a little bit of an app that's only using React and managing state itself, or mainly just a component. And then we'll look at what does Flux mean. So Flux is an application architecture they have for client-side apps with React. So these code snippets are going to be with JSX. In a common JS syntax. So everyone know what common JS is, or what I mean by that. For those that don't, common JS is what, if you've ever worked with Node, that's what it is. And you see require statements to require a module, that's what you get. That's the syntax. The other is AMD or require JS. My preference with common JS is that I'm already with it in Node at times, and the context shift is just, I don't have to think about it. And I never bought into the structure of require.js. So that's my thing. And then I packed with Browserify. Anybody heard of Browserify? You guys? Yeah? Okay, so I use that, and there's a library, they call it a transformation that's Reactify. So when you Browserify, you Reactify, and then that's your React app out on the other side. So, so JSX. This got a lot of like flack, like real. I mean, this is controversy. Who likes the idea of JSX or HTML in your JavaScript? Who likes that? Who doesn't like that? No one. Wow. Okay. So interesting. So the Facebook guys, they came up with, they identified that HTML has a familiar syntax for defining tree structures with attributes. So who here has used HTML? There's a point, right? So if I were to describe to you, I can tell you an interface to build. So I want a title of some sort. I want a description of that, and then I want column data in columns. I have to practice that word a couple of times. You can all mentally picture the tags you would use. You're likely going to use a header tag. You're likely going to use a paragraph tag. You're likely going to use a table, right? So it's a familiar syntax that we're all already ingrained with. So my advice is to give JSX a chance. Work with it for a few days, and you'll see the benefit. So what does it look like? This is like one of the smallest components, and the H1 tag there is an actual React component. So the only requirement for a React component is that you return a root node tag, so a single root node tag. And that's actually something that when you first start working with React in general, even if you write the JavaScript, you've still got to return a root node for that component. But that bit me very early on, because I built stuff and then I didn't have like a div that just wrapped around it that I returned in my component. So, but that's JSX, and then this is JavaScript. So you have to remember, you know, types, prop, children, and these are child elements. So you have React create elements in there. So it's a little bit cleaner. And this right here, also to point out, is where you would attach this to the DOM. So there's two arguments to that, and so we'll look at more code examples. So play with this. This is on React's website, and it's a live compiler that shows you side by side what your JSX turns into. So it's very, very helpful for just getting a feel for it, and it's quick. You don't have to install anything. Components. Everything in React is a component, okay? And components are just like functions. You can think of like properties or function arguments, right? That's what they have. I'm going to look at some of the main methods you're going to use here. Render, which we just saw, get initial state, and default props. Those are the main things. So here is a like fully blown React component. So I'm using React create class. I'm using the render function to return JSX for this, and then I call it right here. This is the call. So that's as simple as it gets. And yeah, so I don't have anything else to say about that. This is taking it one step further. So get default props. So the idea with React is that you have data that needs to come in that does not need to be changed in any way. Function arguments, right? Or what we don't have right now in some things is in JavaScript is a way to kind of enforce that, and there are attempts at making that the thing. But React, with these props, they've made it to where when you've got a prop, you can't change it. So you're likely going to display something to the user. So this is a way to display a name if you pass it, which I've done here. And these are also the syntax is familiar, you know, HTML attributes. But if not, it'll default to sir. So you're going to see that these are the three common you're going to see in your components. The next, and this is where it takes, it goes up another level, is initial state. So a React component can manage its own state, and that's kind of what sets it apart, in my opinion, from other attempts. So Angular They have directives, but you can get a bit, I don't know, you can hang yourself really quickly. In my experience, I've hung myself really quickly. So with state in this, I am now referring to whatever I get from somewhere else. So I've got a function that I've just named get data from API. That can be an AJAX call, whatever it is. And it loads it in state, and then I can reference it and change it. So that's in a couple of slides we'll see how data gets changed with events and so forth. I'm just briefly going to breeze over these. So they have some additional component methods to be aware of. Prop types. So this is a way for you to validate those props that come into your app. If I know I want an object, or if I know I want a string, I can do that with a prop. It's just an object definition, and I don't have code sample. I don't really want to focus on that. The other to be aware of is a mixin, and that is where you can package up whatever code that you've got that would be replicated in multiple components and just reference it in those. So you can bundle it up, and kind of like a class. I really don't like that, but static is another interesting thing that I just learned about, in that you can define a function that you can call outside of React in the component. So I don't know, maybe for instance like that get data load, we could define that in the component, and then outside of the React component I could call that. I don't know, I've not seen a good use case of that, so the reason I included it was maybe just to put a feather in your cap, maybe just keep your eye out for anything you see. So again, just some more examples of like props and what you would use props for, right? So you want to pass the whole object. You don't want to pass all these attributes to this thing. You want to pass very small things and things you're not going to change. You're not going to change the ID or the report. And I'll explain the key in a minute as we're iterating over a list. React, you need to pass a key when you're iterating, so that it knows how to build out that virtual DOM. And this will be a date picker, and these are perfect things to pass in, stuff that can be from outside. And just think of anything that you would put in prop, and that's one of the big divides is where you put the data. You put it in a prop or you put it in state, right? Think of it, whatever the source of truth is. So the date format, that's it. So it's not going to change. We're not showing 20 different date formats. Here's some state, and here's where it gets a little bit, goes up another level. So this is a portion of a checkbox component. I've left the render function off, but we'll see that in a few slides. This is where we're actually changing data. This is a function to toggle the checkbox, and I'm doing an anti-pattern in this that is considered, it's considered an anti-pattern in React, but I'm using it in the only way that the anti-pattern is acceptable. So it's technically right. I can prove it too. So what I'm doing is I'm setting state from a prop. Okay, so in this call I've got a prop that says the initial checked value. Initial checked is whatever that is, or default it to false. Now this is a no-no to set state based on props. Okay, the thing that I'm doing, I'm not when I update the value here that lets me know the internal state of this component. I'm not referencing the same thing. So that's the only thing that makes it value, and I've made it explicitly clear that it's initial checked. So if you go to the React site, they have an example of in bold print saying don't do this, but here's the only exception. What we're outside of the anti-pattern, we're responding to a change in state of that checkbox, and now you can also do things like send this to the parent component that's calling it. You can via something else you pass into props, another function from a parent. This is a pattern you'll see very frequently in components. State really should contain data that a component's event handlers may change to trigger any kind of UI update. So select lists, clicks, anything like that. It's easier to ensure that your UI is consistent when you do everything in a render method, which I'll move on, but that's related to state. Don't have like computations and functions outside of your render, because you're not really saving anything, and actually you're counteracting what React is trying to do. So I'll point that out on future slides. So now we're going to get into the life cycle of a component. You've seen a component, you've seen some state and props. I'm not going to talk about every single one of these, but I do want you to be aware of them. The first one I'm going to talk about is component did mount, and this is to back up. Component will mount is kind of like is this thing gonna go, right? Is it ready, right? You can access that method on the server and the client, and in later slides we'll talk about the isomorphic stuff. Component did mount is, did the thing is it there, right? That's the earliest point that you can interact with it. So this is a good place to put AJAX calls, right? So, or functions that call elsewhere. And you're likely going to use this one more than the others. So there's a mounting phase, and then there's this updating phase. I could not find, I've not used component will receive props, but this is literally a way to check if your component is receiving props. I don't know why. I don't know why, given with the props itself, I don't know. If anyone knows of a way to use this or why you would use this, I asked in IRC and they didn't know. So, but find me after, or no one responded. So, should component update? This is pretty cool, and this is where you get into tweaking. So you can actually tell the component, if you return false here, and you're certain that you don't want this component to update, you can just return false, and it won't update in its recompilation of the DOM, right? It just won't, right? So if you're at that level where you're fine tuning, because I have no idea, I don't know. I've not run into with lots of data, I've not run into a situation where I was like, man, this should really go faster. So the milliseconds are good for me. So, but you can do that in this method, and any time that you think that component you don't want it to update for whatever reason. Maybe you want to delay some alert or something like that. I don't know. It can, yeah. So the component will update. This is another method that it's just in that lifecycle that you can kind of a checkpoint. And then whether it actually did update, you may use this as well. And in that, if you need to do some sort of cleanup, I've not needed this. The cool thing about this is that they've got this lifecycle, and I haven't touched any of them. Like, okay, great, right? I mean, it's cool, right? That they have, and the cool thing is this is the inner workings, right? This is at a high level. This is like the real inner workings that you can touch, but you're likely not going to. So all of this is about simplicity and being able to declare things and then be able to reuse things. And everything is a component, so you want to reuse that checkbox, for instance, right? So now we can take a look at this is the same checkbox with the initial check and check state. So let's take a look at the render function. This is familiar code, and they have an attribute for their inputs, their text areas, and their select lists that have certain this checked or selected attribute that can be applied to them. I should back up and say that when an input or a form element there's a thin wrapper around it that React puts on it that will give it some additional things like this, this attribute. So, but then outside of that, it's just a normal input. You can I'm and notice that I get the initial check, but I refer to state even down in the render method here. So from this point on, like I'm just responding to the state. So I want it to keep its internal state. So when you check the box, there's an on-click or an on-change. So events, they've got most browser events are supported. I've only really ever used on-change or on-click, right? Because most of the things you do, that's where it's related, especially with just minor data-driven form UIs. The on-change triggers that internal method, and then the state is updated. So now this checkbox is physically checked, and then you can query it and get that state. So this is handy when you want to do things, change classes, when you want to react to things, no pun intended, right? For inside of that component. This is a list being rendered in computed and rendered in React. And a minute ago I mentioned the key property. And why you want that is that I've got an error message that shows why you want this. React will tell you in a very nice way. That's one of the other benefits is something errors and then you're like, what just happened? What do I do, right? And they give you most of the errors that I've encountered, they give you a way to get yourself out of that. So you want to specify a key. It gives it an identifier on that element. And in this case, I am iterating over some expense items, and I'm writing those out. I'm sending this to a new component. I'm generating a new component, and then I'm inserting it in my return. You'll see this a lot, and this is good to compute everything in your render function. Don't put this out into another function and return from that, because you're not really gaining anything. And I think they're actually penalty. You can get from what I've read, you can get your UI out of sync by doing that. So they highly recommend doing it this way. So this is how you have to start thinking about apps and composition of an app. Everything's a component, and you've got multiple components inside of a component. So I'm using a report or an expense app, and you have a report app, and you have all these components. And I've highlighted here the neat thing is that you've got stateful components, and then you've got pure components, right? So in a pure component is just something that doesn't have state. You can call it a stateless component. A set of slides I saw recently used those terms to own states. So this thing owns the state of the subcomponents. When you've got inputs and drop downs in a form, you don't want all of them just willy-nilly firing at the AJAX list. Maybe you do. You have that freedom. But if you need to collect data and then send it, so like a contact form or expense form, right? Some sort of report form, you want a search form with multiple criteria. That's where it's very useful to have like a parent that receives a event. The parent sends something like this to that child component and says, when that's checked, report back up to me whatever the value is, and then there's usually a mechanism to set that value in the outer and something like this, so that at the time that you have a form that needs to be submitted, when that handle submit is triggered, it will send all the data from the components. So hopefully I hope that made sense. It goes from really basic to really complex really quickly. So again, to reiterate just what I meant by pure component, it's this, right? So it doesn't really have much state, and you can have properties and things like that in here. That's still considered pure, what I consider a pure component. But you don't really hold much state, or you're not really responding to things. And then here's a component with state. So you have computations being done. You have change event firing and updating state. So any questions so far? Like, anything? Okay. So some tips and tricks that I've run across. So who here has an app with jQuery? Or any other library? So one of the common questions is, can I use this with that? Can I use this with that? This is an example of using an external, so we use a component or a plugin for jQuery called Uploadify. And we call this Uploadify function when you, to instantiate it with a whole bunch of variables here. And right now, to get it into a React component, this is it. That's all you have to do. This stuff stays the same, and the only thing you do is you render that input, and you give it, this is a new thing, the ref file input. So this is how you get to the DOM inside your React components. You give it a ref, and then you can query the DOM. Don't go crazy with it, but you can just query to get that, right? So I'm using this.refs.file input. So whatever you put on there in that ref, React will give it to you up here. It's called getDOM node, and it's just like you're doing get element by ID or anything, the jQuery selector thing. So you don't have, and I'm doing it in component did mount. So once it's fully mounted, this is the time to do that. And then I instantiate that just as I would before. So anything that you use right now, you can put it into a React component, and you don't have to really redo anything. It's more just a wrapper around it. And the cool thing is that right now, this has gone from not being in a virtual DOM to being in a virtual DOM. So like you totally have a virtual DOM, like it's putting jQuery and all that kind of stuff in a virtual DOM. Yeah. This is cool. Who knows about the, so I mentioned the isomorphic JavaScript, but who's actually done it? Anyone done the isomorphic or server-side rendered JavaScript? Okay. Okay, so it's cool, isn't it? Yeah, it's cool. So this is a little Node app that has one endpoint, and this React application that I've got up here, I am wrapping it with a create factory method, which is what they want you to do when you want to do it server side. And then I've installed Node.js and React with add-ons. So there's with React with add-ons, you get the JSX compiler and all that kind of stuff. They ship React without that, and if you want to glue it, if you need that in development, you can certainly use it. But just wanted to point that out as well. But and this right here is so anybody use Happy, or it's the alternative to Express? Yeah. So this is the Happy endpoint. And what is happening is render to string. So just as when you load a React app and attach it to the DOM, it is rendering, it's compiling it or transpiling it is the right term, and it's doing that on the client side. So if it's mobile, if it's desktop, whatever, it's doing it there. This does the same thing on the server. So like you've got all that server computing power, and you can set all of that up before it renders. And then you literally just, this is like in a template, you just have your value here. And you, one thing I ran into, I was playing with a new templating library, Swig. I'm not sure if you've heard of it. It looks like handlebars, but and some templating libraries will auto escape HTML, so that will mess you up, but just make sure. But literally all you have to do if you've got a completely working client-side React-based app and you want the initial render to at least be server-side, that's all you have to do. Literally this one statement is what you have to do. And then it sets the entire DOM up. So if you look at who's viewed source of like a React app, if you viewed the source of it, there's all these little data attributes that are on there that with numbers like 0.001, 0.02, and that's what's spit out from here. And when the browser receives it, it's just like it received a static page, which is utterly mind-blowing. So that means you go from like rendered. That's, you know, you don't go from 0 to anything. It's just rendered. And then all the browser has to do is attach event handlers. And if you have, like in some of the slides, we got very few event handlers, then like, yeah. So you get like, yeah. I mean, you've got server computing power. Yeah, go ahead.
So when you pass the app in there, the object literal, that would be where you actually pass in state.
Yeah, you can pass in state. Yeah. So oh yeah, sorry. This is state. So like yeah, you can set it up just like you would pass the normal thing. That's the call. And yeah, to repeat the question, he was asking about this the curly braces, and that's an object you can pass in for state. And the thing, so I've only used it for like initial page load, and I don't know. The cool thing is that once it's down there, the client takes over. So what happens is React sees this come down. I mean, it sees the virtual DOM constructed for it. It attaches events to it, and then as your well, way back where I have a slide of it, the get element by ID and that rendering to that, it sees that it's already there and it just stops and it says, oh, okay, I've already got this, so I'll just remember, I'll just keep that. I'm not going to do the same thing twice. So it completely takes care of that. And for those of you that were that November, there was a speaker that Aria Stewart. She gave a talk. I have not watched it yet, but she was recently on the Node Up podcast and talking about just developer environments and things like that. And as a side note, if you haven't seen any of the work she's done, she's at PayPal, and they have a framework called Kraken, and just the stuff they're doing there is amazing. And to talk to her, I mean, she's just got amazing experience, and she's impressed by this. Like that was the statement on the podcast, was that I don't know how it works. I mean, you can obviously look in and find out how it works, but like it's just one of those things that works, and she hasn't been able to break it. And so I kind of, you know, that's an opinion I trust, so take that for what it's worth. But definitely look into getting that initial render if it's an app that you have that, you know, you're not sending more than just a login page or something. And this is what I alluded to earlier. This is extremely helpful. So when I didn't have a key property, and when I don't, I'm still bit by it. When I'm rendering a list of things, it tells you, hey, you know, each child should have a key prop, and here's the reason, and here's a URL that takes you there. So it's, if you use the others, they're either no error messages or very cryptic, and this can so look at your console, right? Like seriously, like to reiterate on CommonJS, you should definitely use it. If you don't, give it a whirl. You can the cool thing with Browserify and using CommonJS is that who knows about NPM, right? Everyone knows about NPM, right? Everything that's available on NPM can be available in your browser, which is okay. That's awesome, because then it makes, like, it's neat. Or if I go to an older version of our app, I'm not using Browserify or anything like that. I'm working on a prototype that is going to be bringing that in, and so the context it's a shift that I am not. I'm like, oh wow, this would be great if I didn't have to do that, right? So, give JSX a few hours. Just play with it. Ignore the controversy, and then you can get. I recommend installing, you know, with using the CommonJS and Browserify. Use React by NPM and React tools, because you've got this gives you a JSX command that you can compile things. So you can. It's just another way of playing with it. You can play with it locally. You just get that local compile, and you can use your favorite editor. So React questions. I'm going to continue on. This is going to go on for about, what, 6 or 7 hours, I think, with Flux, right? Yes. Yeah. Whoops.
I want to throw out there that two things. One, the React Chrome extension is excellent.
Yeah, that's what. Oh, that's right. I didn't even point that out. Yeah, that's what I was using there. Yeah. Oh, actually, it wasn't in there. That was a console message. But this right here, there's the React.
Yeah, you actually can, instead of looking at generated HTML source, it'll actually show you your component tree. You can inspect and see state.
Yes.
Everything is awesome.
It is insane. Yeah, and you can actually see prop. They've got a. Sorry, I don't mean to cut you off. They have a props in the state right here. So you can click on those elements and see, instead of console log and warning, it's just if you've used the Batarang or whatever that is for Angular or any of that, you can see, well, at this point, I click on this, what's my state, what's my prop? So like you just, yeah. Anyway. Okay. Sorry, no, go.
I forgot what it was.
Oh, I'm sorry. Well, just interrupt me in a minute. Okay, that's good. So, anything else? And I can go back to slides if that's helpful. Or,
I have two things that came to mind.
Okay.
If you're using NPM,
Uh-huh.
that would deploy modules that would rely on the Node API. So
Sure.
it really would work with someone wouldn't work with the browser.
No, it would. Yeah, that's where you use Browserify. Yeah.
Oh, so
Yes.
You can
Yes.
use Browserify as a bin emitter, you can use the IO,
Yes.
you can use pretty much anything.
Yeah.
Almost all the Node standard library will work. Most of the NPM packages will work. Oh,
Yes.
You say,
repeat all that in the microphone?
I will. I'm gonna. Don't even forget it. Go for it.
right, yeah, that's fine. Yeoman, if you guys use
Yeah.
that, it's the front end generator app. They have an awesome Flux and React generator, which will actually build a bootstrap boilerplate for you that will have Browserify, gulp, and like basically a whole scaffold for a Flux app. You just type in go generate Flux, and it'll feed you up and running everything in software.
Got it. So Will was saying, I'll repeat what yours was. Will was just saying that Yeoman, the generator that builds that will create like an app structure for you. They have a generator for Flux that will set up your Flux app, give you Browserify and gulp and so forth. So check that out. And then the question was if I use sorry.
Oh, if you pull in NPM modules using required.js,
right.
what we have.
Right, yeah, so the question was if you pull in NPM modules with require, so that syntax I was using here, that require syntax on the top, that is not native browser supported, no. But Browserify puts those in there. So it's a real cool bit of code. I highly recommend you go look at it. It's a little small snippet of code. And actually, Browserify, look at the source because it will wrap like React, the library. It will wrap it and give it like this little identifier that it knows about. So it's actually a really neat thing. But it's essentially, if you guys know what polyfills are, those kinds of things, it's kind of like, that's the way I think of it. I don't know if that's correct terminology, but it basically allows you to use require statements, and then you can just require throughout your app, and just like you were in Node. So, and another on the Browserify thing, keep Webpack. Any of you guys heard of Webpack? Yeah. So it's, I mean, I don't think there's really any one versus the other. I mean, they pack things down, and they've got transpilers that you can glue in for the different libraries. Webpack, Pete Hunt, who was on the Facebook React team, he has a post, and I don't have it in my resources, but I can certainly get that out to the group. A lot of links for these things we're talking about. So, anything else before I move on to Flux or no? Oh yeah.
What would the benefit be of using something like React versus another framework like backbone views, using the backbone libraries?
My opinion. I'm sorry.
So what are the pros and cons of these?
So back up to the first slide. I mean, the virtual DOM, the ability to have small components. It's a different way of approaching things altogether. I mean, it really is. Backbone. There are tons of blog posts with sites that have Backbone infrastructure, and they're just switching out the view layer for React. And they keep their Backbone models and all that, right? That's the beauty of this, is that it's really a view layer, but then it can be more. Well, I mean, it really is just a view layer, right? That's really what it is. But that's what we need, because what we have right now, we're running into bottlenecks. I'm sure with Backbone stuff, you've run into child views and issues like that. So my answer would be it's a different way of approaching the problem, and you're doing things outside of the DOM. That's the main thing. You're doing it outside of the DOM instead of inside, right? Because with the DOM, you're still pushing and pulling and querying, because Backbone is based off of it requires jQuery, so that's essentially what it's doing under the hood. And this does it completely outside of that, and then renders one time. So that's one thing I didn't point out was that React renders the screen on every single change, re-renders the entire browser, and it sounds like it would be like counterproductive to do that, but when they were building React, they were looking at game libraries, and they found that, oh, this thing's being rendered 60 frames a second, and this little guy's moving around, and that's so performant because if they had to do all the changes pixel by pixel, it would not scale on mobile hardware, right? So that they took that and applied it to the browser. And that's where the virtual DOM, it does the computations in JavaScript, and then puts the completely rendered DOM in the browser. Anything else? Maybe. I'll move on to Flux. So Flux is an application architecture for building user interfaces. That's the tagline that they have. So what does that mean? This is a more complex diagram. I'm going to get to a simpler diagram in a moment, the next slide. But this is what, we'll talk about this again, but this is what's going to be happening. And React views are here. So there's all this other stuff right here. Now that you're scared of this, let's go to something simpler, right? So, right, so I got to change everything. Okay, so there are really, 4 things that happen, and you already know about views, right? So you're adding 3 things, and all of this is about a unidirectional data flow. So right now we have data that's coming in and out and in and out and in and out from all areas in our apps. The view in what we've seen previously, I'm going to start from this and then work back, but the view is a button, okay? So a button or a link or something like that, and it listens for actions, okay? Actions are at that end. Now we're going to jump to that side. So an action responds to the call, and there's data that comes with this. So if you click a button to submit a form, it's going to have a payload of data. And there's a defined action we're going to look at code in a minute, so yeah, just bear with me. That's a defined action that says, click submit, right? It's listening for that, and its only job is to receive that call and to send it to the dispatcher. This is the part that makes, I don't know, something really stuck with me about this because we all know, how many of you know what a promise queue is, right? That's what a dispatcher is, and so Facebook has built this really generic, really cool promise queue, right? That it manages events, right? So think event emitter or even Backbone events, right? So that event system that Backbone has, and there are parallels that say use. There's one called Fluxbone, and it's a gist that's floating around, or a project in GitHub that says you could use that in place of it. It may not be a good idea. So that dispatcher receives it, and then its only job, so everything has one job, right? And the only job for the dispatcher is to send it to the store, to a store. And a store responds to actions. So you've got display logic, you've got literally an action or some event that's happening. You have something that is like a traffic cop, and then you have something that responds to that. So let's dive in a bit. So this is a little bit of a prototype that I'm working on in taking an expense app, the company I work for, and doing it in React that makes some sense. So there's fake data and things like that. But essentially you have a list of expense reports, and then when you click on one of them, you get a list of those expense items. Okay? So I'm going to walk through an example with using these actions, or all the steps of the Flux architecture, with something like this. So actions, again, they receive events from the views. So I click a button, and there's an event that's defined, to click that. Here's code. This is an action creator. Sorry, I forgot what I named this file. They call them action director. I'll leave action creators out, but this is literally it. So this is the function that your view responds to. So in your React component, when you've clicked the button and there's that JavaScript function that responds to it, in there you call this method. And this is going to send to the dispatcher a click report event. So this is telling the dispatcher that this guy clicked on the top report, right? And then here's the report ID that was passed with it. So literally your function signature is, whatever this is called, app actions.click report, and then the report ID, okay? And this right here, its only job is to call the dispatcher with that data. And all this thing is going to do is place it in a promise queue. That's it. Like that's just it. And then in that promise queue, it's going to dispatch those events to every store that you have. We're going to talk about stores in just a minute, but yeah, let me save that for there. But whatever is registered with this dispatcher that says, let me know about this event, it will send it. That's its guarantee, is it's going to send it, that this guy clicked the expense report, and this is the ID. This is the old dispatcher. I'm pointing this out because there's been a recent change in the past couple of weeks to greatly simplify this, and the new thing is on the next slide. But this was how you would require the dispatcher up there, the second line, from Flux, and then you would define like a view action or a server action. You can have multiple types of actions if you needed to. That was the thinking before. Now, this is from Facebook, but this is what they've done for us. So all of that code went away, and you literally just have 2 lines in there that says, we've completely abstracted this thing. Send us your event, and we'll get it. And if we'll get it to the store that's subscribed to it. That's it. So this is really cool. I actually saw the commit, and I was like, whoa. I mean, there's some other stuff around it, and this is actually I've linked to the commit in the resources, and it's in the Flux repo on GitHub. There's an example, and there's a to-do MVC, that common to-do list thing written in Flux. And Bill Fisher, who's on the React team, he made this commit a week or 2 ago and greatly simplified the dispatcher. So that's really all you have to do. So now we get to a store. This is going to respond to that action that's been passed to us. It says this guy clicked on the report, and it's report number 1, and it's going to update itself if it needs to do that, because the store is what's going to maintain like application state, right? Think of that it needs to notify other, or it needs to hold something so that it can notify other React components that subscribe to it. So that's where we're going with this. It's not a model, like in the sense of setters and getters. So the idea with a store is that it's getters only. It's a little, I don't know, that flux bone or use backbone in place of a store concept counteracts that. It can be done, and there are some examples out there of people implementing apps with it. But it's not really a model. The best way to think of a store is that a store manages the application state for a particular domain within the application. So if I've got an expense report, I'm going to manage whatever it is about that expense report in my store. So things like the grand total, that's going in the expense report because that matters. But things, I mean, that's inside of that domain. But things like alerts, that's not a good thing. Or even expense report alerts. That's probably good for a notifications store. And break these things out so that they manage their own state, right? And the last thing to point out here is that stores don't really communicate directly with the server. We'll go back to that other diagram in a minute, the one that's more complex and not straight across. And there's the Flux idea is that you handle those in an action or an action creator. So this is what a store looks like, and in order to make it big enough, this is going to span over 3 slides, so bear with me. The require statements, and we're requiring event emitter. Anyone who's worked with like Backbone or those kind of it's just an event, right? That's all it is. And this is kind of like as a no-no. This is static data, and we're just identifying like a change event. This is where the meat and potatoes is. So what you define is your expense report store, and you're just extending. You can use Backbone extend here, event emitter, okay? And you want to you literally. This is Will brought up some controversy about, and this would be the time for that toilet paper slide. More controversy. Well, actually, there's controversy later on it, but about how can you have a store and not have to have all this boilerplate? You could totally do that. You can have one of these and inherit from them, but I don't think it's too much. Like, because you really need these 3 methods, and they're the same, right? You want to emit a change, and you want to add a listener. This is for your view, and we'll see that in a minute. Like your view code, this is where it goes, and then you want to remove it. So when you're done with your React component, when you're closing things down, right? You want to get that change that listener off the DOM. So you can totally abstract this, or you can just put it in there. I haven't found a problem with it being there. So, and inside that event emitter, this is where you put like these functions, these get functions, and if you want to get an ID, or you can put these convenience methods. But this is the state, right? This is where you're saying, okay, when a view asks for something, oh, well, this is the current ID, right? It queries a store. We're getting to it in a moment. And this is the last part. This is where we'll have the controversy. Toilet paper slide. This switch statement is where you respond finally to the click report event. Okay, so what's happened is we have gone from someone clicking on a expense report. The action is sent to the action creator. It sends it to the dispatcher. The dispatcher says, my only job is to send it to all these stores. This store receives it inside this switch function, right, or switch statement. And all it does is say, okay, you basically have a case statement. And one thing to point out, in all of that would have been like an on-click function in jQuery world, right? But it's a little less unstructured, and you don't have this pipeline of events that you're sending through. So I'm totally acknowledging that. But this is the point where it would respond and say, okay, I'm setting the current ID to whichever one he just sent me, right? So I've got that whole payload of data, which is just an ID, the report ID of 1, and then I'm going to do this thing and emit a change. This is where it triggers the view to update. Okay, so that's really all a view is doing in this architecture is listening for that update that says, okay, this guy, this thing, I sent it, and then now I've got something back. And so the code walkthrough, the code we're going to walk through shows you that the view will check back with the store and say, okay, give me everything you have, give me the new stuff. So again, this is what we're in, and we've clicked that report. Does majority of people follow? Any questions so far? No? Okay. I mean, I'm sure there are tons, but yeah. So this is that row that's got the click happening. I'm requiring the expense report store and the actions so that I know what they are. And then this right here is querying the store to get the current ID. And then, and actually, in another slide, I have a function name I've settled on that I learned, and it was get state from stores. It's awesome because I use it in every single one of my React components, and I know I'm getting the state from the stores, right? That's what that is. And then the cool thing is that in this object here, I just have data coming from their respective stores, and then I set initial state based on what that is. So this really should be, and I totally missed that. This should be to get the state from the stores, and then update those two. And this is the meat and potatoes of those listeners that we have in the expense report store. So what I'm doing is that at the time that the component mounts, I want to add a change listener. So I'm listening for stuff, and then when it's finished and there's a typo and there's not component will unmount, it's good. Yeah. Anyway, will mount. Yeah, no, it's will unmount. So, yeah. The thing about this right here is that when that happens, when the store changes and the event is emitted, so I'm listening for that, I'm calling this _on change. And all that does is set the state and call get current ID, or this would be get state from stores. So when that happens, it's going back to the store to say, okay, give me the new stuff, right? What's the new ID? And that's the life cycle there. Here's the actual click that triggers that in that view code. So I'm calling expense report actions, click report, and I'm passing the ID of the report. Here's the render function of that. And I'm clicking on that LI element and attaching or triggering that on call. So, I'm sorry, the handle click that starts the process. Is that, yeah? No? Questions? Yeah.
So is the store kind of like a model view?
Yeah.
It's like.
Yeah, so the question was, is the store kind of like a model view? I mean, yeah, kind of. I mean, so I think of it as literally, so like, I think of it as more of like a session. Okay, that's the mental model I have. I don't know if that's helpful. I don't know if that's wrong. That is how I envision it. You know, maybe like a local session or something like that. That's what it's keeping up with state of this particular domain, this area, right? This is an expense report. So everything about that, right? The grand total, the whatever, it's keeping up with that. So some other things to point out in this code. Let me go back a couple of slides. I didn't mention this before, but and Jameson, this is for you on managing like classes, right? And HTML, CSS classes, right? So that are appended to an event. There is CX at the top. I think that just stands for like class extender. I don't know. It's a really cool little method that you send it an object, and then it will write your class code because hold on. So classes, right? I'm using it right here. Calling in class name, and that's also another thing to point out. There are a few attributes, sorry, that are with React that like you're going to get bit by. So when you put classes in your HTML, you can't use class, right? You just can't. You have to use class name. There's and that I believe the reasoning about that is their newer versions of React are written in ES6, which is using the class syntax. So and actually I think that's in right now that you can write ES6. ECMAScript 6, if you guys don't know what that is, it's the next version of JavaScript. We're currently on 5, so and it has like a class syntax. So I think that's why that's kind of a reserved word.
I think the example's 6to5.
Yeah. See 6to5. We'll mention 6to5.org maybe. Google 6to5 in JavaScript because it will. Man, it's just one of those. It's really cool. It's going to be fun. A fun ride to ride that thing. So it's. Anyway, it will take this object, so you can have an object, and then you can, with like a a clause in there. So this is how you would do that. Your question earlier. So I'm setting the active state on this expense report up there based on if so that as it's rendering this, the state of this one is the expense report ID that's no, I'm sorry. If the expense report ID is the current state, so all the way back to the store, whatever I've retrieved from the store, that get current ID, this right here. So that's where it comes from. So this, I'm literally responding to an updating state. That's an actual. That's about as small as I could get an example that walked you through everything and completely confused everyone. So sorry. Yeah. So again, that's what it. You've got change events, and then the cool thing about this is that I do have slides that show this next thing, the expense item list. Okay, and it is able to. Here's the get state from stores. I left it out, but it literally just queries the expense report and the expense item store. So I've got a whole separate store for the expense item, and this is an example of your listening to multiple stores. So I have subscribed. When you emit a change, let me know about it, and I'll get the state of you. So I want to know in this expense items list, I want to know what the current expense report is so that I can render the right one, right? I mean, it would, yeah. And this is how you do that. Yeah, everything, and this is, when you're done with it. And then I render, and this is pretty cool. So, and then I built a component, so this, and I was rendering it out, and then I was like, okay, well, I want, when someone clicks on one of those, we want to present a form, okay? So this was how hard it was to put that form in place. So I literally put an if clause that says if the current expense item is this one, as it's looping over it, show them the edit version instead of the non-edit version. And in things that I've worked with in front end, it's never been that just drop in straightforward. Maybe I'm doing it wrong, but and then you render that there. So you build up a list of items. And another thing to point out, this is going to hit you. I should pick something else, but maybe local state. I don't know. State, and I set it to this state because when you're in a loop here, I'm in map here, but if you're in Backbone and you don't bind this, it'll bite you. And it's not going to fail silently, or it is going to fail silently if you need to refer to this in that function. So this just goes back to the this in JavaScript. And if you don't know about the this in JavaScript and what can bite you, Google it and then start coding with loops yeah. But you just be aware that when you're referencing state in loops, you may run into. I was referring. What happens is that you're in this, and you're referring to this. Then you would not actually be referring to the React component. This. You would be referring to the local this. So 2 more slides. The recommended app flow. About all of that, we talked about the React views, the actual view and the user interaction. So that click to select a report, and the action creators. So the app, yeah. So this is another piece that they've added because as we have started writing these, we're like, okay, well, where's the right place to go get data from a store? Or I'm sorry, from a server. And the response has been, okay, an action creator. I'll link to, I've got a blog post that I'll link to that they implemented it with an action creator this traditional way that would wait for the data and then send it on its way. So literally, if it needed to go fetch those items, right? The click happens, it goes to the action creator. That says, okay, Ajax call or it says web utilities, which is just a, whatever it is. If you want to use Backbone, that's where you put that stuff, right? It's whatever your API interface is. That's cool. And I just have a data API utility library that I just put functions in that just have simple, AJAX calls in it to get the data. However you get the data, that's there, and it comes back, and then you send it on its way. This blog post talks about putting that in production and then stumbling on a better way of sending a promise down with it, and so whenever you can continue on, so it sends it to the dispatcher with another promise, and so when it's returned, then it's I don't know. I read it last week, and I'm still digesting it, but mentioning, so you put it on your radar, that this might not be the best way, and anyway, you go get your data, send it on down, and that takes care of, how do you get data in this thing? Because all you really want to do is update your store with that data, and then update your views. So I mean, it's just this loop of updating events, and that keeps that one-way data flow. Well, it doesn't necessarily keep it. So that's one thing I want to touch on is the one-way data flow. It's an idea, and it's enforceable in things like Erlang, those kinds of things, right? Because that's part of the language. But JavaScript is not, and so how do you build an application and get around, and keep someone from messing it up? I don't know. I mean, it's developer responsibility, in my opinion, and time will tell as we implement this out. But the cool thing about all of this architecture is that you have a place to put everything. So when you need to put something to the UI, where do you put it? The view. When you need to go get data, where you put it? Action creator. When you've got a click event, when you've got an event or something like that, you put it in an action. And then everything else is in the store. So that's your state. Where is your app state? Well, some people rely on the server. Some people rely on local storage. Some people this or that. This has it solves most of the problems that I've run into over the past few years writing these large things, and it's done in a way where I can totally see it scaling out. If I've got hundreds of components, I can break them up into directories, and it doesn't care, right? I mean, it's not really, and you've really got one dispatcher, and you can. Rodney knows about some server side, so there's an idea of having a server event to where you can push stuff, and then the React component will respond to that, or the Flux action, so you can literally push things down and have a whole, you basically make another dispatcher. In the old way of doing it, you would have a server dispatcher or a server view action, client view action. That's how it was. That's why it was named handle view action. And now it seems the way it doesn't matter what it is. If you literally want a class that says this is the server dispatcher, this is the client dispatcher for your sanity, you can do that. But you could use WebSockets and push something in, and then your store would update. It would get into the dispatcher, your store would update, right? So that's it. I've got some resources here. The React site is really, 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 really good. It's phenomenal documentation. There's some things that are missing, but I encourage you to read this thing over and over again. The main page to read this page 10 times and do the example. This will help you make that leap. Thinking in React. If you just Google thinking in React, it'll take you right there. This walks you through building multiple components in a search thing. So you got a table and you want to search that table. The Flux website is awesome. Their GitHub repos are amazing. So that if you pull them down, they've got example directories. They've got a couple of example apps that don't really do everything that it needs to do, but it'll get you there, and they kind of do some hand waving for when you're interacting with an API. Egghead, who knows about Egghead? Anybody? Okay, yeah. They were the guys that were doing and they still do Angular screencasts. But they have two series, one on React fundamentals. So within, it's going to take you 45 minutes to watch these, and another hour to watch the Flux architecture. But you build a little app in React, and then a similar app in Flux, and it's a $15 subscription, but it's well worth it. And so you can subscribe for 1 month, download them, and then they give you the MP4s or whatever, and then unsubscribe if you're not happy with. But they put out screencasts quite frequently. And then this is the link, direct link to the new dispatcher and that commit where they made on the Flux repo. So I'll be around after if you guys have any questions, and hit me up on Twitter. I don't have it on here, but I'm at Kevin Old. And thanks. Any questions? Will.
Do you have any examples of using like a router library and maybe building single-page apps?
I don't have. So the question was, do you have any examples of building a using a router, one of the single-page app router? I don't have any examples of it, but I have been playing with Ryan Florence's React router, and he is actually, if you don't know Ryan Florence, he's from the Ember team, and about mid-year, he was on the Ember team, and he switched over to React because he was just floored with what it was doing for him when he started playing with it. And he's actually helping to pull in what the concepts with React into the Ember view layer. So if you're using Ember, there's that's something to look forward to. Yeah.
I was wondering, how do you get in? Maybe I didn't understand quite what it is. The store, where does it get into set what's in the store? It looks like it's all different. It's just an initialization.
Yeah. Sorry, it was actually really quick. It was a single line. Now, that was it right there. So, and current ID, back up here. Current ID was just set to 1, right? And actually, now that you pointed out, that should be 1, and then the one I should have selected in the screenshot should have been 2, but no one caught that. So anyway, so I declare a local variable of that, and this can be whatever you want. Like usually, this is just a, I just set this as an object, right? And I just have a hash full of data. But in the down here in the action. Where it's responding to the action, it literally just sets current ID to the one that was passed from the UI. Yeah, and then it does that, and then and also like your so far these action I'm not calling them functions. You can totally abstract this out into a function or reuse it if you need to, but whatever is in here is actually really small. So when I'm responding to an action, I really want to, do something real small. I want to update an ID. Here's the error. Here's the message that I want to pass. Here's it's really small. So the controversy that I forgot to jump onto that Will pointed out today was this switch statement. If you've got a bunch of actions, it can grow really long, and that's true. But I mean, 5. I don't know, like 5 actions a store so far have not really been. I don't know, and I think at times you want to, when you're learning and playing with the store, then of course this is, I don't know, learning as I go, but I try to keep whatever in that store that's kind of what I can keep in my head. So so I mean, I've been talking about expenses, and so there's going to be, I'm going to need to know what the currency is and what the grand total is and what the, all of those, what the category is. I'm going to need to know those little bits of data and potentially have those as events of certain things, when the currency changes, when the category changes, go get me new custom fields, things like that. So, yeah, but it's down to 1 line. And then also to point out that after that 1 line is set, you emit a change. So if you don't have an emit change in your response to an action, then your views aren't going to know about it. They're subscribing. So this is, and I didn't want to use, or I haven't put PubSub, and they don't really, it's not really PubSub, but I mean, you're literally publishing events, you're broadcasting events, and then you're listening for those and taking some action. Anything else? Okay, well, thank you. I'll be around. Appreciate it. And take all the notepads and pens and get some business cards. They have 10% discount on the back of them. So.
You guys want to hang around for just 1 second? Raise your hand if you're interested in that free Nomad.js ticket. We'll do a quick, like, random drawing. Keep your hand up if you're interested. Okay, so I'm going to give you just a number. So you're 1 in the hat, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. If you have a number, put your hand down because I can't keep track of everybody. 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Anybody else? Everybody? Okay. 13. All right. Lucky number 13. I'm going to do just a random.org number generator, and then you just give me your email address, and we'll get you the ticket.
It's easy. Yeah.
Okay, number 10.